Life is not the same. Consciousness is not the same. And in particular, since it interests me the most, reading and writing are not the same. A gargantuan shift has occurred and, since history or evolution have not ended, is occurring. It unfolds in unpredictable ways, enmeshing itself into the fabric of our everyday lives at unorthodox angles, challenging preconceived assumptions, throwing the fixed into flux. I was born in 1978, a mere 7 years after the creation of the first ebook, Michael Hart's mainframe version of the American Declaration of Independence, depending on your definition of an ebook, and just over a decade before the creation of the web in 1991. In the intervening 35 years, all has been transformed. Whatever one calls it, the Fourth Revolution, the post-Gutenberg galaxy, the digital age, the electronic era, the communication revolution, the hypertextual period, the exponential epoch, it has led to a reshaping and transmogrification that is so enormous it is not always easy to live within this time period, and to be able to step back and gain the perspective on the change that comes with the benefit of long historical hindsight. The microcosmic puzzles and pleasures of the everyday sometimes cloud our vision. Sometimes we miss or take for granted the information tectonic shifts, the earthquakes, the collisions of continents, the Pangaean fracturings, the Himalayas of ideas that have been generated, that are being generated, that will be generated. Whatever our nomenclature for it, it is everywhere. Rooms themselves are not the same as they once were. Today I work in a primary school. When I was at primary school myself in the late 1980s, there was a computer in our classroom. It was a BBC Micro. The total memory of the computer was a mere fraction of the memory and capability of the computer on which I am currently recording this. But the computer was also different in another profound way, beyond the question of processing power and Moore's law. It was isolated. It was not a node in the internet nexus. It was not interconnected. A friend and I spent an inordinate number of hours working on a project about the Isle of Wight, where we programmed a picture of the Isle of Wight by painstakingly coding each line in BASIC, one at a time, to represent the island's coastline. Today, of course, we could have started a school project about the Isle of Wight by copying and pasting an image of it on a Creative Commons basis. But in retrospect, what strikes me more than the meticulous labour involved in doing what now seem relatively simple things on computers was the way in which the computer itself has changed its role in that particular room. Now, it is a portal to an exponential expansion and a hyperabundance of information, ideas, knowledge, concepts, discussions, controversies, and consensuses. Today, I work in a primary school that, ostensibly, is remarkably similar to the one I remember from almost 3 decades ago. On the surface, all is recognisable, and in one corner of the current room, just as in the past one, there is a bookshelf with approximately 200 books in it, descendants of the 15th century Gutenbergian revolution of movable type printing. Yet in the corner now there is a computer that is a portal to the explosion and of expression and communication of the internet. Had I been locked into the classroom in the 1980s with enough food and water to survive, there would have been a finite limit to the number of words that could have been read in that room. The finite number of words was based on physicality, on the ink on paper derived of course from trees. There might have been a de facto infinity of the words of imagination in that room in any single child's mind, but in terms of the external, quantifiable number of words there was a limit, and a particular number with a definable endpoint. Today, locked into the classroom, there would be effectively an infinity of reading that could be done, reading that is the product of the virtual and the digital, a shift to a form of abstraction beyond the directly physical that does not render the physical irrelevant or unimportant, but which reshapes our entire relationship to it. A shift to an abstraction that is a bit like the creation of algebra or the number zero, and that may prove to be as significant, in the long historical sense, as the development of something like agriculture. Whether ink on paper is as historically finished as the scroll or illuminated manuscript, and whether reading is now a matter of screen and e-reader, is not a prediction that I wish to make, just as I would not wish to make predictive statements about what happens to something like copyright in this different world. The technology of the printed book still exists and is still popular. The two forms may prove to be mutually exclusive or successfully interdependent. Time will tell. Instead, however, I observe the shift that has happened so far, and observe that the time period involved so far is a short one in historical terms. My generation has lived through these transitions and shifts. The generation that I teach, currently younger than a decade old, have known nothing else. For them, whether they are conscious of it, their world is one of implicit hyperabundance of information and communication in a way that was simply not the same in the past. Stories of what those older rooms were like will be stories from a past which is as foreign as a foreign country. The room I remember contained 200 texts. Their room contains trillions. In the room I remember, an 8-year-old version of me would have been almost certain to have not been able to find out anything, whether fictional or non-fictional, about, say, polynomials, Polynesian islands, polyglots, or the history of the work of Johannes Gutenberg. For the children of the new generation, they could put any of these words into Google Books, Open Library, or Wikipedia, to name just 3, and not stop reading for months, years, lifetimes. As well as listening to, and of course talking over their teachers, they can attend university lectures from across space and time at the age of 8 without enrolling at any university. Their room is not the same as my generation's was. The boundaries and limitations of it are simply different, qualitatively, quantitatively. It is the difference between an asteroid and a galaxy. The general background in terms of our particular stage of human history of this post-Gutenbergian shift is one that has deep complexities, and in this context I make no predictions whatsoever, but I will instead be nothing more than a fascinated observer. While we are experiencing this exponential explosion of information in all directions, this inescapable hyperabundance, we also face challenges in terms of the hyper-scarcity of physical resources, either occurring right at the moment or on the horizon, chiefly of oil, though by no means limited to it. Human population has risen exponentially in the course of a very short time period in historical terms, in a way that is profoundly and fundamentally different from the broad, steady state that was the hallmark of the majority of the 200,000-year period of Homo sapiens. At the time of writing, we have reached 7 billion and are moving relentlessly towards 10 billion and beyond. The challenges and equations related to human population needs and physical resources are complex and problematic. We may be destined for a marked contraction of population in the long term, and a different kind of human existence that is much more limited in terms of its consumption of resources. On the other hand, and assuming that our beautiful planet retains its Goldilocks ability to support life, what are the real long-term ramifications of the implicit potential of hyperliteracy that lies within our transformed rooms and minds? The potential of cross-fertilized texts as spaghetti junctions of ideas, of ever-accelerating exchanges of words. Could our latent dreams of interplanetary civilization be proved to be real over the course of decades, centuries, millennia? Again, I make no predictions on that macrocosmic picture, but instead will be a fascinated observer of what happens in my lifetime, and on what trajectories our collective and individual processes develop during the course of my brief period of existence in this particular moment in the Anthropocene on this beautiful 4-billion-year-old planet. Hyperliteracy is a corollary of hyperabundance. 25 years ago, when I was the same age as the children I now attempt to teach, had I been asked to do a school project on, say, the Spanish Armada, I would have gone to my local library, a building limited in space and time, and asked for the 3 or 4 books that they might have had on the subject. Those 3 or 4 books might have been borrowed by somebody else at the time. I might have had to cobble a project out of an encyclopedia entry, an entry in one language rather than several, and one without hypertextual trails encoded into it like diamonds. Today, I would have access to more documents and interpretations on them than I could spend 25 years getting my head around. 25 years ago, my local library had about 10 books on a game that I love very much, chess. Today, I can explore the matches of grandmasters past and present and explore exegesis on them at YouTube in minute detail, to name just one site. The change is as exponential as units of wheat on chess squares. So, in the years, decades, centuries and millennia ahead, what are the ramifications of the hyperliteracy that lies implicit in our exponential epoch? What kind of Anthropocene have we navigated our way into, and what further paradigm shifts lie ahead of us? Where next in our imaginations, on our planet and in the world beyond our planet, do we have to sail?